Inside the Commonwealth, Power After Empire. Episode 1, Lagos, January 1966. January 1966. Leaders from across Africa, Asia, the Caribbean, and the old Commonwealth board a BOAC flight from London to Lagos. They are traveling to Nigeria at the invitation of one man, Sir Abubakar Tafawa Balewa, Prime Minister of Nigeria. The agenda is urgent: Rhodesia's unilateral declaration of independence. A white minority government has seized power, and the post-imperial world is watching closely to see whether Britain will act. This is not just another conference, it is a test. The first special Commonwealth Prime Ministers Conference after Singapore's independence is deliberately held in Lagos, not London. That choice matters. Nigeria is Africa's most populous state. It is a symbol of post-colonial leadership, and it is a country whose own unity is already fragile. Sir Abubakar Tafawa Balewa convenes the meeting for the 11th of January 1966, less than 3 months after Singapore joins the Commonwealth in October 1965 as its 22nd member. The crisis is Rhodesia, but Rhodesia is not just a local rebellion, it is a test case. Can Britain enforce majority rule? Will African leaders accept delay? And will the Commonwealth fracture along racial and economic lines? On the flight to Lagos, Lee Kuan Yew observes the composition of power itself. There are archbishops who are also presidents, like Archbishop Makarios of Cyprus. There are African leaders newly arrived at power. And there are veterans of empire from Britain, Canada, and Australia. The stage is set, and it is unstable. At the centre of the meeting stands Harold Wilson, Prime Minister of the United Kingdom. Wilson faces impossible constraints. British public opinion will not support military action. More than 130 members of the United Nations are watching, ready to internationalise the conflict. And British economic interests in southern Africa are deeply exposed. African leaders demand clarity. Kenneth Kaunda speaks emotionally about white domination. Milton Obote speaks with a tone that Lee Kuan Yew later describes as deeply hostile and ominous. Wilson makes his position clear. Britain will not use force against Ian Smith's regime, not because the issue lacks moral weight, but because the consequences are too severe. Military action would be politically ruinous at home. It would destabilize neighboring African economies, and it could push Rhodesia further into defiance. At this point, Lee Kuan Yew intervenes, not to defend Rhodesia, but to reframe the debate. He rejects the idea that Rhodesia is only an African problem. He reminds the room that settlers exist in Canada, Australia, and New Zealand. He insists that the real issue is race relations, not simply independence. And he warns that a world divided into racial absolutes has no survivable future. His position makes him unpopular, but it cannot be dismissed. What the cameras capture are speeches. What they do not capture are decisions. Public sessions are theatrical. Private sessions are decisive. Lee learns quickly that speeches rarely change outcomes. Real decisions happen in restricted, leaders-only meetings. EA's Harold Wilson cannot climb down publicly. African leaders cannot soften their positions publicly. So a compromise emerges. Rhodesia discussions will continue. Britain will buy time, and sanctions will replace force. Outside the conference hall, history moves faster. Within days of the Lagos meeting, Nigeria itself collapses into violence. The Commonwealth speaks in moral language, but it acts within political limits. And in Africa, those limits are about to be tested violently. In the next episode, we ask a harder question. What happens when independence arrives before institutions? Lessons Untold. Relax, review, reflect.